Perfect. Well, without further ado, we're going to jump into this breakout session. So thank you so much for choosing us out of the breakouts, for giving us your ears and time today. Obviously, I'm biased, but I'm really excited for this session. We have an incredible set of panelists today to talk about responsible AI practitioner and what that means in our different organizations. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to them to briefly introduce themselves and just share a bit about the perspective that they're bringing to this conversation that's really focused on, okay, this role of the Chief Ethics Officer, the Responsible AI Officer, a lead is joining and growing, and that's exciting, that's great. What are the skills? What are the future here? What might a kind of professional pathway looking forward to? So Enrico, beginning with you, if you could just share where you're coming from and also what being an AI ethicist means to you personally.
Okay, thank you. So I'm an AI ethicist professional and at the same time president of the Association of AI Ethicists and working in Europe as a convener in working group 4 at Sensenelec for producing standard for the EU AI Act. As a president of the association and as a professional ethicist, one of my first mission is to try to institutionalize the role of AI ethicist in the field. And to doing so, there are several pillars that I'm working on. There is a part related on research. Another part is supporting with the association AI ethicists. We are trying to support them legally, psychologically, and technically, and finally trying to write the first EU standard on the competence of AI ethicists in order to help companies to choose the right standard for AI ethicists and to do procurement for them.
Thank you so much, Enrico. And to you, Bernd.
Hello, my name is Bernd Stahl. I'm a professor at the University of Nottingham. The reason I'm here, I guess, is that I'm also part of the BCS. I work with the Special Interest Group on Ethics in the BCS, and we did a survey of BCS professionals on how they perceive to be ethical issues, how they deal with those. As my introduction, I want to make two suggestions, two hypotheses, 2 points. One of them is that we've heard a lot about implementing ethics today, so we're now going to the next step. I would argue that that's impossible. You cannot implement ethics. That's a misunderstanding of the concept of ethics. Ethics is about unpacking, exploring, looking at dilemmas, looking at contradictions, at trade-offs. There is no clear route through, say, ethics says this is what you need to do, this is how you implement it. It's impossible. That's my first point. The second point is around the location of ethics and the nature of ethics. I assume all of you now have had some exposure to ethical theory. You've seen Kant and utilitarianism and virtue ethics and all those things. What I think ethical theory hasn't really given us yet is an understanding of how you deal with normative questions about right and wrong in ecosystems. We've heard the word ecosystems 50 times today, at least, right? What ethics is not really good at is dealing with these complicated systems, natures of the social interactions where ethics becomes relevant. So my second point then is ethics needs to develop to be able to deal with complex multi-stakeholder ecosystems, and at this point, it doesn't really do that. I'll stop here.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to learning a bit more about those hypotheses. And Dr. Kelly, over to you.
Sure. So my job is actually to apply responsible AI governance to the workplace. I work at a company called Workday. We help our customers manage their people and their money. And so it needs to be applied. I figured out a way to do it. Happy to get into it. I think maybe a lot boils down to calling something like ethical principles and responsible AI practices. And so there is some translation involved in that. So very excited to get into it. My background is in social science. I worked for many years for the US federal government, for the agency that applies civil rights laws in the employment space, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So my background, my greatest expertise is really in bias and fairness concerns and how to take what seems like a really philosophical concept of fairness, what does that mean, and look at the laws in the space and then apply it in the sense of a best practice framework. So glad to be with you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And last but not least, Myrna.
Hi everyone, I'm Myrna MacGregor. Similar to Kelly, I'm on the pointy end of trying to implement responsible AI and ethics at Ocado Technology, which is a part of the business at Ocado where we design an end-to-end online grocery platform, not just for Ocado, the supermarket, but also 12 retailers around the world. So I like to say it's like 5 businesses in one in terms of e-commerce, fulfillment, robotics, and delivery. Tess, you asked a little bit about like what being an AI ethicist or a responsible AI lead actually means, like what are the key characteristics. I feel like it's a combination between a juggler, a translator, a researcher, and a maker of things that happen. And it's quite exhausting and trying to keep up with, I guess, all of the different components that fit into the role. And I think what's also a little bit exhausting is that a lot of us are doing this for the first time within our companies, or because this is quite a new field. And so sometimes it feels like we're making things up as we go along, which is why these kinds of events are very handy in kind of validating that perhaps other people are making things up in a similar way.
Good. Well, if you weren't already excited for the conversation, I hope you are now, because I am very. Jumping right in, exploring kind of how we are seeing ethics integrated within our organizations. I'm going to direct this question to Enrico and Bernd, and then I'll follow up to Myrna and Kelly. But Enrico, and then to Bernd, could you share your perspective and what you're seeing in various organizational models? So have you seen kind of centralized ethics teams or distributed approaches?
The majority of time I've seen a hybrid approach, and to be completely honest, the majority of the time you have a reaction of the problems, or just a very clever people that are trying to do some ethics in a company, but they do not have a framework that they've chosen in a clear way. The point I realized in the year and when my experience, and everybody said that ethicists should be called at the beginning of the process because it's better. I like to use analogies, and just if you can imagine designing a car, a racing car, you cannot do the body for the aerodynamics after knowing what is in the engine, because you need to know all the components in order to design a better car. And it's quite always the same. A lot of ethicists are called at the end of the pipeline saying, can you please tell me if it's good or bad what we have done until now? And you just have to answer, I wanted to know what we have done before so I could help at the very beginning. And this is one of the major problems, understanding what ethics is doing. I do agree extremely with the fact that it is not a list of box to tick, but it's a process. I also teach in some university. I generally told to my students that whenever we use ethics as an adjective, like ethical, we are in some way wrong, because ethics is a discipline, so it's a process to arrive to something that is bad, good, or, and the majority of time, neutral. Because happily enough, the majority of systems stay in a state of inertia all the time. And we work a lot to maintain those systems in a state of inertia. And this is important because companies have to allocate resources to make the ethical decision. So if we understand where there are the thresholds, so we can say when we have to put investment or allocate resources in a real ethical problem, then we have more resources and we can find the solution. So this is what I've seen until now.
Thank you, Enrico. And Bernd, what are you seeing?
So we've done a number of case studies. So this is in the University of Nottingham and previously looking at organizations that were developing AIs, and this goes back to 2017, 2018, to try to figure out how they understood the ethical challenges of AI and what they did about it. And part of the answer to the question then is, well, some of them identified people whose role it was to look after those ethical issues. And I agree with you that there is no standard way of doing this. Some big companies can afford their own roles. They may have AI ethics officers. Certainly most small and medium companies don't have anything of the sort. They may have the idea we want to use AI for some sort of business purpose, and then it's somebody's job to think about it in a typically very half-hearted way, or sometimes brilliant way, but it's not structured. So at this point, I would say this whole idea of having an AI ethicist is still emerging. And I was really surprised when I saw you on the panel that there already is a professional body for this sort of role. I wasn't aware of that until I was invited to come in.
Awesome. Well, for people that are doing the role, Myrna and Kelly, what does your day-to-day look like? What are the kind of practical challenges that you're facing, and I mean the role in translating from non-technical to technical teams, navigating stakeholders, and putting together a strategy for Workday and Ocado Technologies? We'll start with Kelly and then come to Myrna.
Sure. So what does the day-to-day role look like? So I've been in this role for 3 years now. I would say the first year was trying to define it, trying to think about like, how are we going to measure this? How are we going to approach this? Who else do I need to help me? Because at first it was just me. And so then I hired on a data scientist and another social scientist and a governance expert. And I started adding people piecemeal to the team to say, what else do we need to make this work? More recently, we have an AI governance structure in place. So we always do a risk evaluation for every new AI product that we build at our company. And so we built it to be actually self-service for our product dev teams. We're a very small team, and our product dev teams are very large. And so it's facing them. And we work to make it quick. It's about, it's a conditional sort of survey. So it's really not more than 10 questions that they get. What is the function of this product? What's the business value, et cetera? So they go through this questionnaire. We track it on the back end. And then depending on the risk tier, we deliver them a set of what we call protocols around things like fairness, explainability, interpretability, different steps they need to take in the process as they build the product. And then we store their responses to those questions. So we're maintaining the documentation on the back end. So the day-to-day role has a lot to do with maintaining that, dealing with edge cases, because no matter how good of a program you build, someone will come with something and it'll be like, wow, I never thought of that before. How do we approach that? So there's sort of that one-on-one consulting with those edge cases. And then there's lots of conversations with customers. Customers are getting a lot smarter, how they ask the questions, what they want to know about, what kind of questionnaires they come to us with, like vendor questionnaires, how they feel about the answers, a lot of customer conversations. Sometimes I'm lucky enough to have conversations with regulators, investors in the company as well. And then, my role first, anybody who's been a supervisor, manager, director of anything, your role is first to do, and then slowly it becomes to manage the doers. And so I've slowly, as the team has built up, I've got people working on different aspects, and so I'm dipping into what are they doing and how can I help and support. So that's kind of a snapshot.
Thank you, Kelly. And Myrna, your day-to-day, what are you getting up to?
Yeah, so unlike Kelly, we don't have a team. Actually, only 50% of me is dedicated to responsible AI. The other 50% of me, I work on data and AI strategy. And actually, those tend to come together quite nicely because responsible AI needs to be in service of your overarching business strategy. But that does make my inbox tension quite difficult. I'll pick out a particular element of my day-to-day, which feels like it's growing. So I was a diplomat before I moved into policy and then to responsible AI. And I feel like that experience is becoming increasingly necessary because I spend a lot of my day mediating between governance functions and I guess the technology, strategy, what the business wants to do with AI function. And some of that tension is inevitable. I think it's probably part of any digital ethics function in that you have the company saying we want to do more, faster, quicker adoption, more innovation, we want to take some risks, we want to get ahead of our competitors. And then you've hired governance teams to say, well, actually, we need to keep the company safe and do X, Y, Z. And increasingly, I think because of the focus on AI and the conversation about AI, they are becoming very worried about AI risks and very keen on imposing new restrictions or policies and guardrails, some of which feel a little bit out of sync with the company appetite to do more. And so what's the sort of middle point, or kind of what's the right risk appetite to set? And I spend a lot of my time trying to mediate what the correct risk appetite is. It's quite an awkward position to be in the middle of sometimes. And yeah, we can perhaps unpack some of those challenges.
That's really interesting, though. Like, you need to know what the risk appetite is of your company and the executives in your company. Like, you have to start with that. Back to your point about how do you take this theoretical thing and make it work. Like, it really is context dependent, don't you think?
Yeah, and I think the difficulty with AI also is it's general purpose. Yeah. And you don't want to have a single checklist, a single set of rules for any AI application, which feels very heavy-handed for some and not significant or sufficient enough for others. And so how do you design a flexible way of interacting with your organization that feels sort of clear, but also that can kind of grow or kind of minimize with whatever the risk level and the risk appetite is of a use case?
Yeah, this relationship of risks and ethics is of such interest. I've been doing a lot more reading on it, so if anyone has literature, please point it my way. Just a bit digging in a bit more to the work you guys are doing. So, we saw DCIT's Responsible Tech Adoption Unit come out with a bit of an introduction to assurance within an organization, so how ethics is operationalized with assurance techniques and standards. And in this introduction, they say you evaluate, you measure, and then you communicate. And I think that communication element is so important. So how within your organizations are you communicating what you are doing, but then also kind of the value of this new role, this new profession, and the kind of impact of AI ethics work within your organizations?
I think what's interesting is that there's now a lot more appetite to hear about what's going on. I feel like for the first few years, I was very much working in my own little world and no one was bothering me. And now I think there's some interest from investors. The company wants reporting on responsible AI in the annual report to show, I guess, kind of ESG credentials. And so there's more focus on, I guess, projecting some of that work outwards. And I know that's something you care a lot about, Tess, and that you're hoping that investor pressure leads to more kind of work in this space and more responsible practices. I'm also being summoned to a number of different boards, sort of our risk committee, our personal data committee, to also report on what's going on. And it feels like I'm doing a lot more reassurance than I was in the past. But again, also trying to inform some of those risk functions about the innovation imperative, and that should be the leading, like the guiding part of responsible AI is enabling us to do more, but in a safe way, and not just over-index on this is risky, this is unsafe, don't do this.
Thank you, Mirna.
Yeah, I can so relate to your point about nobody cared for the first couple of years. People pretty much left me alone for a while, but now, yeah, I've suddenly gotten popular, which is interesting. But so your point about, you also mentioned about investor pressure. Some of the conversations I have with investors, they'll ask about, which it sounds like you're passionate about as well, like, why don't you make more of this public? So I mentioned a minute ago, we have this risk evaluation and these protocols. Right now, they're internal facing. I can describe them to you, but we haven't published anything about them. And so there's been a decent amount of pressure around that. And I keep coming back to your point because it's a good one. My response thus far has been, it would actually be nice to be able to not just share these things sort of on their own with nothing to compare to. And so one of the things we're working on actually right now is we're working through like a third-party analysis of our program against the ISO standard. I think it's 42001, the AI risk management one. And can't wait for that to be done so I can, here you go, like rather than just put this thing out there in a vacuum, here's the thing, here's how it measures up to that thing, and this is our next step. It's kind of like the story that I could see. But you also asked another question I think is really important, and I've thought a lot about, which is just how do you measure your relevance and how this thing is working? Once you have this sort of like these core governance aspects in place, like I can tell you how long it takes for dev teams to fill out the risk eval, like down to the minute, because we're tracking it that way. I can tell you how many products we have that are high risk versus lower risk and what they are. And then I can show you like the protocol, you, the executives at our organization. People really like things they can measure, especially execs. They love dashboards. So it's like, here's what it looks like in a pie chart. Like, here's how long it takes, that whole thing. So that's been great. And then the other thing I'll quickly mention that I just learned along the way was I hadn't spent a lot of time thinking about what is the business value? What is the business value of responsible AI? And I know it's important, but I hadn't had I was deep, and it was hard to come out and come up with like bullet points about the business value. So I found a really great product marketing partner, and I sat down with him, and God bless him, he spent a lot of time with me, and I just said, here's all the stuff we do. Help me get to some bullet points about how this is valuable to the organization. And he was great. He was like, okay, so you mean you've built this foundation, and then as new regulations and requirements come on, you can adapt to them quickly because you have the foundation. And I was like, exactly. And he was like, that's business value. Fantastic. And he's like, so we don't have to go back on any of the new products that we've built since you've had this role and rebuild them because they weren't built on a foundation of responsible and trustworthy. That saves a lot of money and time. And so anyway, working through with him, I really don't mean this to be an advertisement, but I found it so valuable. It kind of goes back to like different people have different expertise. It kind of takes a village. And so his expertise being product marketing was just so valuable to me because I don't have that. And it really helped me answer that question.
Again, this kind of teamwork, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary skill set, I think is really important. Bringing Bernd and Enrico back in, talking about evolution of skills and the kind of core competencies that we're seeing in this kind of profession. This mix of technical and ethical and business competencies, what do you kind of see as essential within the Association of Ethicists as kind of a mix of the tool belt that's appropriate? And then to Bernd, I was reading, and I will complete it eventually, an incredible paper, BCS paper, where you talk about and you kind of advocate for the professional registration of AI practitioners. And I would love for you to kind of jump into this as well as the framework that you kind of share. And the potential kind of requirements and how they might evolve in the future as well.
Yes, so I'll start from the paper because we have a paper that is going to be published in AI Ethics, written with several researchers, Zoe Cocchiaro, Alessio Tartaro, Claudio Novelli, Luciano Floridi, me, and Morley. And this is one of the paper that is part of a bigger research, because the other one was a series of interviews of professionals around the world to try to define the competence of AI ethicists. What is interesting in the paper that we defined 3 characteristics. We just take the foundation of ethicists in the clinical field, because they have a long experience in applied ethics, and we try to see the difference of ethicists in AI. And some of the characteristics were exactly that. Being a researcher, because we are obliged to maintain a high level of competences, being an educator, because in all the communicational part we need to do some training or education, share the language we use, because language is one of the most important things to share. And the last one is being a facilitator, and this is also something that you experience every day. So we found it in the paper that is going to be published and in the interview. What is interesting about it, that it helped us to define 5 different pillars for the competence of AI ethicists. And our AI foundation of AI, you must know. I studied philosophy, but I couldn't stand an ethicist without any competence in the AI part, because it's going to be dangerous for doing the profession. Then the social impact, very interesting, not very useful every day, because everybody talk about social impact in the journal, but not in companies. They are reduced, but we have to know that. Then you have the ethical theories. Anyway, you have to know the basis. And then AI governance and regulation, just to know where is the limit of the profession. AI ethics arrive after that a company is compliant with the regulation and is not in opposition of that. So we have to know that one. And the final one is the practice of AI ethicists. And so you have to limit your logical errors. You have to know all the different kind of code you can create. You must have some business competence for 2 main reasons. The first one is helping companies to apply ethics without going against their business model. And you cannot say to a company, you are going to bankrupt to be ethical. The second one is to know the business unit of your company, so you know to whom you have to talk with. And just to finish and to try to make a bridge between what you were saying and what we was saying before, we finished the paper with a paraphrase of a citation of Kant that just say principle of process without skilled professional are empty, and in the other side, professional without principle are completely blind. So I think that can resume what we are trying to do
I
with the
am
association.
so looking forward to this paper. Please send it as
Sounds
soon
really
as
good.
the inner philosophy training in me
It's
is
already
getting.
available.
Is it? Oh.
Yeah.
Is it who is the AI
It's not
Ethicist?
published yet, but it's in SSR.
Oh, okay, perfect.
I have a question about that, though. To what extent do you think, by putting together all of those pillars, you're describing a unicorn? Because it feels almost impossible to try and cover all of like that breadth of expertise in one person.
It's like for a doctor. A doctor has a lot of different disciplines that have to study, and just to know where are the drawer of the information he has to open when he needs those information. And so the point is that I arrived in the profession, and honestly, it's not a lot of time that ethicists are being paid to do this job. Even if I studied philosophy and ICT in the 90s, it's quite a new profession in the market. At least to be able to live with it. Okay, and the point is that we needed to create a theoretical framework where ethicists, lawyers, engineers could come in and say, okay, I need to have more competence in ethics to do it, or more competence in law to do it, and to share the same language, the same tools, the same approaches. And this is the basic approach.
I wonder how much of it is also perhaps one human that has a little taste of each of those, but then, I mean, Kelly, you mentioned you work within a team.
Yeah.
So maybe if there's a piece missing, or you need someone that's a bit more, savvy on technical side of things, or governance as well, you kind of pick and choose depending on resources as well.
This is one of the points of the association, trying to support technically ethicists, because in some companies they have teams, in other one they are alone. And so the support is legal, psychological, and technical. Legal because I think we need a new form of contract for AI ethicists. For example, we are working on the non-endorsement principle. So a company cannot ask an AI ethicist to endorse in a social network what they are doing, because it's going to have a conflict of interest, and it can be very hard to face with it. And the other one is so psychological, because they are alone, and technical because every time we do not have all the competences. So we create a team of support for people who are working alone in a certain company, even bigger company. There are multinational where you have independent, a single AI ethicist.
Very, very important and interesting work. Bernd, on your paper, please do share some findings as
Okay,
well.
okay.
Thank you.
Okay, let me start by saying that about 5 years ago we proposed, coming from a European project, we proposed something that we called the role of an AI ethics officer, which I guess is very similar to the AI ethicist. And that included the point you just made, namely that they have to be more independent than the normal employee in the company. And we suggest that this should be modeled alongside the DPO, the data protection officer in the GDPR. So they have to have a bit of freedom that normal employees wouldn't have. And that seems to come through, so I'm happy to hear that. So what we did in the BCS, as you probably know, used to be called the British Computer Society. It's the biggest ICT professional body in this country. And we asked all the members of the BCS whether they had interactions with ethical questions, what they were, what they thought the BCS should do about it. We got 1,300 odd responses, and it turns out that a lot of them are, a lot of the members of the BCS are very concerned about ethical questions. Many of them had encountered them, and they felt that the BCS should do something about it. Not just the BCS, there were also recognition that other players had to play a role, the government, regulation, and so on. So one of the suggestions we made on the basis of that survey was that we should look into the registration of computer professionals, AI professionals, whatever you want to call them. The idea being that this would be similar in terms of professional recognition to the more established professions like the doctor that you already mentioned, lawyers. Why do we need that? What's the point? This is not part of the BCS paper, that's my own interpretation. I would put this in terms of accountability. I think the digital industry has been very good at getting away with being not accountable for decades. Right? If you look at what happens to faulty software versus a faulty car, Microsoft has always been very good about ditching that sort of responsibility. So accountability is a key issue, and again, we've heard this several times today, and for me, accountability means being able to trace back from somebody who causes something to the consequences, and then getting redress where needed. That is a very complicated, very large question that has regulatory components, that has to do with all sorts of societal functions, but one function that in the ICT world isn't really developed is that of the profession. So a doctor you would typically trust because you know a doctor is registered with the GMC. If they're not registered with the GMC, they're not allowed to practice. And in order to be registered with the GMC, you have to fulfill conditions A, B, C, D, E, and G. You have to pay N £100 a year, which they don't like. My wife's a doctor, so I know the game. And you have to re-register regularly. You have to show that you're competent. You have to continually update your professional knowledge and so on. So the idea here is computer science is not there, and a lot of computer scientists don't want to be there, but certainly for some aspects of computing, and that's certainly high-risk type of AIs, we are suggesting that we need to move closer to that. So if professionalism is sort of a continuum from being completely unregulated to the medical doctor on that side, then computer science is probably here at this point, and we're suggesting it should move a bit further in that direction. And registration for particular competences to demonstrate that people are capable of doing certain things, understand the risks, understand the business role, that's something that we think a professional body could do and probably should do.
And this would be for folks like us, like applied sort of responsible AI ethicists in companies, or for the computer scientists?
That would be more for the computer scientists.
Interesting.
I mean, the BCS already mandates all computer science students who study at university in this country, if they want to be accredited by the BCS, to go through a professional and ethical training. I know that because I teach the Nottingham University undergrads, 380 of them. Not all of them like it, really not. But it is a requirement that they have to go through in order to get the degree which is accredited by the university, which is accredited by the BCS. Right? And I would say that there are probably different routes into being an AI ethicist. Now, you're a philosopher coming at it from that perspective, but I see some of my students who are computer scientists would probably love that role as well. Yeah. So I think that and you talked about social science, so there are many different entry routes, and I guess the question is, now, do we agree on what are the competences? Yeah. And professionalism in the sense of the BCS may be one step in that direction.
Yes, just to support what you are saying, in something like in Europe, we are creating two standards, one on the competence of AI ethicists and the other one on the upskilling of ethical upskilling of developers. So it's, we are arriving more or less in the same direction.
I want to keep asking questions. I want to keep talking. I want to keep everyone forever. But we do have a coffee break coming up, and then we have our final session of the day, which I'm very excited for as well. But I would love to give each of our panelists just kind of a final statement. What do we kind of see in this profession, a potential way forward in the next 3 to 5 years? Does it look like professionalization? Does it look like certification? What, from your perspective, is coming down the line? Can we start with Mirna and then make our way?
I think I might just react to that and say something that I don't want to happen. So what I don't want would be for some kind of accountability function for the kind of the ethicist, the responsible AI lead. I don't want to carry the responsible AI risk for my organization, and I don't think that should be part of the role. And sometimes teams look to me and say, you know, what should we do? And I'm like, no, I'm the one that asks the questions, and you need to make the decisions. I'm responsible for asking the right questions and providing you some resources. And so I would definitely support a push towards more accountability sitting on behalf of the data science teams or the product owners of AI products, and a collaboration with a responsible AI ethicist function to ask the right questions before something is signed off. And that's, I think, a better model than hoping of kind of overly formalizing and pointing accountability towards like this discipline.
That's really interesting. I could hear you wanting to say something. So I'm glad you got it.
I don't want to be on the hook for this.
That's really interesting because currently I'm pretty sure I carry that responsibility at Workday. I signed up for it. That's probably why I have a team of dedicated professionals, and I go and speak to our board of directors at least once a year, for example, and they ask me, investors ask me, customers ask me. So yeah, I'm responsible for it. And it's, yeah, I mean, there are definitely times I wake up at night like, oh God, what if there is something I didn't think? Because obviously the technology moves so fast. Like I mentioned, it's been 3 years, so this was pre-Gen AI explosion, right? So most of what I built was around what I would call like predictive AI. And so more recently, you know, when OpenAI made the big splash and everybody suddenly understood what generative was, I'll admit, I looked at it and said, yeah, but that's not what Workday does. Like, we're not consumer facing. You can't just ask us, you know, it doesn't work the same way. So I thought, it's not going to affect us quite as much. And I was wrong. We're developing generative AI products now. So I have to look at this governance program I built and say, okay, how do we adapt this? And so it'll be interesting to see how things go. Like some of the developing regs in the US where I'm from, in case you didn't catch the accent, they do require, like they're mostly state and local, but they'll say, you know, basically one neck to ring. Like you have to designate someone. And so, but you know what? It's like, I don't know. It's kind of cool because it's scary, but it's also cool because I can learn from the kinds of things that you all are talking about and figure out like how does it make sense in the context of the business that I'm in. Because if I was at another company, it would probably look different. And that's one thing I'll say that I like what you all are talking about. One thing that worries me a little bit to think about as you're continuing on with your research is that sometimes I'll come upon like engineers or computer scientists or UI experts or something like that in our company, and they'll be like, no, I know how to do this. And I'm like, calm down. I'd love to hear your opinions, but this is how we built this thing and this is why we built it. And so the only thing I worry about is, again, the context-specific nature of the work, like based on the business, and armchair experts, if that translates, just like folks who are like, no, I read something, so I already know how to do this. And I'm going to do it the way I think I'm going to. That's, so like, I know I'm going too long, but like, it sounds exciting to have folks who are educated and even like certified or whatever the right word is, working in the dev teams, but also they would certainly need to be open-minded that whatever you read and whatever you heard and whatever you learned might not be exactly how we do it here, and here's why. So it's kind of that, you and I were talking earlier about what's important for folks who work in this area, and some of it is you have to have a humble nature that you do not know everything. I don't know everything. You all don't know everything, right? So like, it's so cross-disciplinary and there's so much learning that goes on, and so that's just one thing that I would put up there.
Thank you, Kelly. Brian?
So the question was, what do we expect to come up in the next 3 years and what do we worry about? And I think it links with what you just said. Do people know everything? Well, we don't. But my opening statement about that you cannot implement ethics is based on the assumption that ethics is about discovery, it's about reflection, it's about thinking. And that's fundamentally different from implementation. I'm not saying we shouldn't implement. I'm not saying we can't implement anything ever. I'm just saying that those are two different things. And that's also where I would see a possible danger in the future. So we've seen today, we've heard many times that we're moving from the frameworks, from the theory to the implementation. And I'm worried that we go too far in that direction. That 5 years from now, ethics will have been killed by compliance. And I think you can see that in other areas. I think medical research ethics has gone very far down that direction. And I think the trick and what we should aim for is to make sure that we keep reflecting, that we keep the open mind, which I think also goes to answer your question, while we are thinking about what that means in practice and how we can shape an organization, how we can shape the way we live our lives. So that to me is the challenge, and I think what I fear where this whole field is going is it'll just move to compliance, and we know what to do, and we're going to be fair, and we're going to be transparent, and that's it. We don't need to think about it anymore.
Thank you. Enrico?
I'm just connected to the fact that one of the main elements of an AI ethicist is not to be a moralist, so not to be the one that has moral deliberation that are right. generally people ask, so what do you think is right or wrong? I don't know. My moral deliberation is exactly the same of the moral deliberation of everybody else in the world. I'm human. What we are trying to do is to create the environment where the moral deliberation can be taken by a team. This the facilitating process. I don't know what we are going to experience in the next 3 years. I just say what I would like to build in what we are doing. And there are two things. Understanding that ethics is not a burden, okay, and can drive innovation, because generally if you arrive at the end, it's going to be a burden. And the last one is that can be a business enhancer. And so if companies understand that ethics can be that, then it will be easier to make companies integrate all the ethical processing inside the company.
Enrico, Bernd, Kelly, Mirna, thank you so much for all your expertise today and for your ears, for your time. Grab a coffee and then head right into the final session. Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure.
Lovely to meet you.
Same here.
So it